The media is all abuzz that the counteroffensive by the Ukrainian army has been a great success. That the Russian army has been defeated, and that we have entered a new phase of Ukrainian victory. According to the media, the Russian military is weak and clunky, soldiers are fleeing in panic, Putin has been abandoned by Xi Jinping, and the Russian economy is in shambles. Even on YouTube in Japan, you can see the gleeful, speechifying people who are good at telling the story of the defeat of the Russian army. This is true not only in Japan, but also in the Western media. However, this tone is very similar to the coverage seen in the early days of Russia's special military operations. The area of control restored by the Ukrainian army was initially reported to be 2,000 square kilometers, and is now said to be 4,000 or even 6,000 square kilometers. So the number is doubling, but we do not know which is true.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці. Провів сьогодні чергову ставку Верховного Головнокомандувача. Учасники, як і раніше, Резніков, Залужний, Сирський, Ковальчук, Літвінов, Єрмак, Монастирський, Кубраков, Данілов, Лебідь та інші. Перше головне питання – доповіді командуючих за напрямками. Олександр Сирський доповів про успіхи на Харківщині. Андрій Ковальчук про рух наших сил на півдні. Розглянули проєкт бюджету на оборону і безпеку на наступний рік. Детально проаналізували ситуацію на звільненій території нашої держави. Станом на цей час стабілізаційні заходи завершено в районах загальною площею понад 4 тисячі квадратних кілометрів. Ще на приблизно такій же звільненій території стабілізація триває. Виявляються залишки окупантів, диверсійних груп, затримуються колаборанти, повертається повна безпека. Прикордонникам доручено забезпечити охорону державного кордону на ділянках на звільненій території. Ще раз дякую усім нашим бійцям, які забезпечили такий масштабний, швидкий розгром окупантів на території Харківської області.
So, let us look at another view from overseas.
So what in the world is actually happening in Ukraine? Over the weekend, if you're in the West, you might have started seeing headlines like this and rumblings on social media. This is Drudge. Look at this. They've got the big front page here. Russia on the run. Invaders pushed back to border. Thousands of troops flee. Greatest counteroffensive since World War II, it says. Now, if you watch Sunday television, you would have heard the same thing. Whether it was Meet the Press or Face the Nation or any of those shows, you could have watched smiling, almost giddy news anchors reporting that Russia is now losing the war. And they're saying this with a straight face. Watch.
Ukrainian troops are claiming some major victories this weekend as they fight to take back territory occupied for months by Russian forces. It is a fast-moving counteroffensive by the Ukrainian military that analysts say shows that the tide of the war is shifting. CNN's Melissa Bell is in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Melissa, give us an update.
Yeah, and so she's, so giddy about it too, just like smiling, like, wow, look at what's happening to Ukraine. And
Russia on the ropes.
Russia is on the ropes. Let's get out to Melissa right now, who's nowhere near the battle, to give us an update on what's actually happening. So Patrick Lancaster is one of the few journalists who's actually been in that region. And he tweeted this. He said, "Don't be fooled by the propaganda saying that Ukraine has made major gains. They have made gains, but not major. Russia and pro-Russian forces control over 120,000 square kilometers of what is internationally recognized as Ukrainian army territory. This week, Ukrainian army gained back control of 2,000. Facts." So
that's
what?
1.6%.
Yeah.
That they have regained. So, that's something, sure.
That is something. And we're going to show you, look, this is not to belittle it, because we're going to talk, I'm going to show you why there is a very important part of this action. We'll get to it in a minute. So what happened? Well, it's best described by showing some maps and facts. How about that? Maps and facts tonight. We're going to get there in a second, okay? But first, Ukraine launched 2 offensives over the past few weeks. First, in Kherson, which was a total failure. Really, a total failure. Even the Washington Post had this to say about it in a summation of the Battle of Kherson offensive. Wounded Ukrainian soldiers reveal steep toll of Kherson offensive. And then let me just pull this up. This is a pig farmer. Look at this guy. I'm going to read this. He says, "We've lost 5 people for every one that they did," said Ihor, a 30-year-old platoon commander who injured his back when the tank he was riding in crashed into a ditch. Ihor had no military experience before Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February 24th. He made a living selling animal feed to pig and cow farms. His replacement as platoon commander also has no previous military experience, he says. He is a commander. Now, may go from pig farmer in a few months to commander. They lost thousands of people at the Battle of Kherson. Thousands of men. Didn't gain anything as a result. Nothing. Next was the new offensive near Kharkov. That one turned out differently. So that's what we're going to talk about now. That one has turned out dramatically differently. A counteroffensive near Kharkiv and south of Kharkiv near Izium. So here's a map just to give you a little frame of reference. There's Kharkiv up to the upper left. There's Izium down to the lower part of your screen there. Notice it's next to a giant river. Ukraine was supposed to launch a counteroffensive back in March. Remember, do you guys remember this? We kept hearing about there was going to be this counteroffensive, get ready.
Yes.
That Ukraine is going to, now we know that, Russia invaded. And then in March, we were hearing, get ready, Zelensky, the army, they're all getting ready. We're sending all these weapons. Ukraine is going to launch this counteroffensive. Well, it never happened. There's a reason it never happened. Their forces were destroyed and they were surprised by Russia at every turn. Russia made advancements that Ukraine never saw coming, which is stunning considering, if you think about this, right? NATO forces had been training Ukraine for 8 years to get ready for an attack on Donbass and Crimea. So they were totally caught flat-footed in this. And no amount of Western propaganda and the ghost of Kiev and the Snake Island, all that bullshit, remember that? This battle now around Kharkiv and Kharkov and into now towards the river, we'll get there in a second. This is the last of them.
Yeah.
Like this is like their last breath. And here's Joaquin Flores. He describes what happens next. He says all of this move towards Kharkiv forced the West to carry out an urgent mobilization among the Ukrainian population as cannon fodder to put out the front of the defense while the units were urgently trained to compensate for the destroyed assault and mechanized brigades. It was necessary to compose Bucha, as David was just talking about. So he was just saying this. It was necessary to compose Bucha as an excuse for military assistance. The people lying in the streets, yes. Right? People moving, all of that. So this was all in an effort to replenish the destroyed equipment and weapons of the Soviets, such as from the countries of the former members of the Warsaw Pact, and as a result, the mass supply of weapons to NATO, artillery, air defense equipment. He goes on to say, it even got to the point that NATO, and with grief and half-formed assault units, had to be filled with experienced NATO soldiers under the guise of foreign legions. Since the entire Ukrainian assault elite was disposed of in half a year by the fire of Russian weapons or taken prisoner at Avastal. So basically...
So those guys who'd been being trained for 8 years, they were the first ones out.
They were the first ones out.
And so you're stuck now with pig farmers.
Yeah, pig farmers and whoever's
left. And people
left.
who really have no business in war.
Or NATO. And NATO forces and people who are there under the guise of being a foreign legion. We just happen to be here, but we're actually part of NATO. We're actually part of this, forces that are pushing against into the Donbass. So he goes on to say that this is further evidence that NATO is prepared to use any and all fight to the last Ukrainian. Think about that. Like this is NATO. This is all, we've been saying this from the beginning. They do not care about the Ukrainian people at all. They're going to use them until the last Ukrainian dies. That's what their plan is. And there will be no Ukrainians left to fight. That's it.
It is about autocracy against democracy. And I stand here with a conviction that with the necessary courage and with the necessary solidarity, Putin will fail and Ukraine and Europe will prevail. Europe's solidarity with Ukraine will remain unshakable. From day one on, Europe has stood at Ukraine's side with weapons, with funds, with hospitalities for refugees, and with the toughest sanctions the world has ever seen. The Russian military is taking chips from dishwashers and refrigerators to fix their military hardware because there are no semiconductors anymore. Russia's industry is in tatters. That is the price for Russia's and Putin's trail of death and destruction. And I want to make it very clear. The sanctions are here to stay. This is time for us for resolve and not for appeasement. This has to be very clear.
Peace talks have been on the table, but continue to be moved off the table because the West is being toyed with to believe that Ukraine can win this while people die. People like this pig farmer who was dragged into a conflict that he should never have been in.
Yeah, and as Noam Chomsky pointed out, the only way that this ends is with a peace settlement, a peace agreement. That's it on the part of Ukraine.
The main question we should be asking ourselves is what can be done to bring the crimes and atrocities to an end. That's the crucial question. And there are two possibilities, as recognized by anyone who has any concern for the fate of Ukrainians. One possibility is to move on to facilitate the destruction of Ukraine and possibly a nuclear war. The alternative is to move towards a negotiated diplomatic settlement. Now, that kind of settlement will be ugly. That's a fact. It will have to offer President Putin some kind of escape hatch. It will have to be a settlement that agrees on the neutralization of Ukraine and some diplomatic finesse to put aside for the time being the status of Donbass and Crimea to be negotiated at a later state, and a ceasefire and withdrawal of troops.
Yes, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with you, Mr. President, with you, Justin. Wonderful to have you here. Indeed, I was yesterday in Kyiv, and I visited Bucha. And there are no words for the horror I've seen in Bucha, the ugly face of Putin's army terrorizing people. And I have so much admiration for our brave Ukrainian friends fighting against this. They are fighting our war. It's our fight that they are in, because it's not only Ukraine fighting for its sovereignty and integrity, but they are also fighting for the question whether humanity will prevail or whether heinous devastation will be the result. It's the question whether democracy will be stronger or it's autocracy that will dominate. It's the question whether there is the right of might dominating or whether it's the rule of law. The world has finally pledged 9.1 billion euros through this campaign, and in addition, the Commission working with EBRD adds another billion for the IDPs in Ukraine. This is fantastic. So 10.1 euros, and if you say that in dollars, it's even more.
Russia is not going to lose this eastern part of Ukraine that has been under attack for the last 8 years. It's not going to happen. So you can get it out of your head. They are not going to allow NATO to push further up against their border. It's not going to happen. And by the way, NATO violated their agreements, their 2014 agreements. This was never supposed to happen. They violated it anyway. They violated it going back to Bill Clinton's era. So they continued to violate this and didn't live up to their agreement.
Last year, Russian gas accounted for 40% of our imported gas. Today, it's down to 9%. But we also see that Russia keeps actively manipulating our energy market. I mean, they prefer to flare the gas instead of sending it to Europe according to the contracts that are existing. So this market is not functioning anymore. So reducing demand during peak hours will make supply last longer, and it will bring prices down. This is why we're putting forward measures for member states to reduce their overall electricity consumption. We are proposing a cap on the revenues of companies that produce electricity at low costs. These companies are making revenues they never accounted for, they never even dreamt of. And don't get me wrong, in our social market economy, profits are okay, they are good. But in these times, it is wrong to receive extraordinary record revenues and profits benefiting from war and on the back of our consumers. In these times, profits must be shared and channeled to those who need it most. Our proposal also includes the fossil fuel electricity producers who have to give a crisis contribution, and overall our proposal will raise more than 140 billion euros for member states to cushion the blow directly.
European Commission President von der Leyen is a hardliner against Russia and Putin, who has never spoken of peace talks. She has served as defense minister in Merkel's government, but is well known for his disagreements with the Bundeswehr. In the process of selecting the president of the European Commission, she was nominated by French President Macron. The nomination of von der Leyen, who was not highly regarded in Germany, was unexpected in German political and speech circles, and she was appointed to a key position while 43.8% of MEPs were opposed. Why does von der Leyen emphasize the strengthening of sanctions against Russia and support for continued war on Ukraine, while forcing European countries to put up with the inflation, food, and energy problems that are impoverishing their people?
The European Council stitch-up has rendered this place impotent until today, when you've got some real power if you choose to use it. What you've seen from Ursula von der Leyen today is an attempt for the European Union to take control of every single aspect of our lives. She wants to build a centralised, undemocratic, updated form of communism that will render nation-state parliaments, where the state controls everything, where nation-state parliaments will cease to have any relevance at all. I have to say, from our perspective, in some ways, I'm really rather pleased, because you've just made Brexit a lot more popular in the United Kingdom. Thank God we're leaving. But it is in the aspect of defence that I think people's minds should be focused. She's a fanatic for building a European army, but she's not alone. When it's completed, NATO will cease to exist or have any relevance in Europe at all. And of course, not to be left out of this, French President Emmanuel Macron, on Bastille Day last Sunday, stood at the front of an open-top car with his nascent European defence force behind him, looking for all the world like an updated version of Napoleon. Be in no doubt, 5 years of these people, the European Defence Union will be complete. And what is there for defence can also be used for attack. And you as a House will have no control over it. Vote against this nominee, strike a blow for democracy, strike a blow for your citizens. Do it today.
The European Commission calls on EU member states to reduce electricity consumption and cap profits for companies that make profits from electricity production? Let companies that make too much profit share profits? Who are the people most in need? Is it the impoverished Europeans or Ukraine that the European Commission will decide? Are you going to make the European Commission like the Soviet Communist Party? Von der Leyen clearly says so. If Nigel Farage is correct in pointing out that the West will collapse the Soviet Union and win the Cold War, making the EU like the Soviet Union, this is a pompous laugh. The Japanese media, talking heads, And even politicians are actively propagandizing that Putin is trying to revive the Soviet Union. Is this really true? Back to the Ukrainian counteroffensive.
Western media reports were saying that Russia was running away and leaving their tanks and their armored vehicles. They were running in panic. There's zero evidence of that, by the way. The Washington Post quotes one villager who saw a Russian soldier drop a rifle before leaving town. Okay. That's the Washington Post. So Western media reports saying that Russia was running away, leaving their tanks and stuff. In fact, it was a very fast moving move by the Russian forces to withdraw from this onslaught and regroup. And now Ukraine is surrounded. They moved so fast, Ukraine did, that they didn't have time to bring their artillery pieces, their heavy guns. And now armored Russian enforcements are coming from the north. They're coming from the east. So Washington Post doesn't have any reporters there. They're not getting this information from that villager themselves. Anyway, maybe it is true. Maybe all of these Russians just ran and panicked. There's no evidence. If you can show the evidence of that, we'd love to see it. Why? Because journalists are not allowed to go anywhere near where the Ukrainian forces are. They're not allowed to. They don't want them there. They're being kept away. So we don't get any video of this. And so NATO and all of the Western media and all of the Western forces are figuring out what are they going to do. So they're training up people, sending them to Great Britain, sending them to Germany, sending them to Denmark, doing everything they can, increasing the conscription age. So instead of like being in the 30s, you could be 50 or 60 years old and be a part of the Legion and be a part of the Foreign Legion and a part of the Ukrainian army. Ridiculous.
In Ukraine, men up to their 60s are prohibited from leaving the country. Those who flee are subject to confiscation of their assets and severe punishment. Is the media not criticizing Zelensky because he is a hero of democracy? In the Japanese media, it is reported as if the Ukrainian army had defeated the Russian army in battle. Many people on YouTube are talking as if the Russian army suffered a devastating defeat. They say that with this partial mobilization, Russia is on the verge of collapse. They say that Putin's regime is crumbling from the ground up. This video shows the streets of St. Petersburg on September 24th after the mobilization order. The whole of Russia is in turmoil, and the media and YouTube are full of images of people running away and protesters being arrested. Where is the coverage? NBC, ABC, CNN, CBC, CBS, the usual mainstream media. How about in Japan? Of course, it may be true that there are those who oppose the convocation, but it does not seem to be the mayhem that the Western media reports. There have been many legal hoaxes reported about this mobilization decree, which we will report on in another video. President Vladimir Putin said in July.
Так называемый коллективный Запад во главе США на протяжении десятилетий ведет себя в отношении России исключительно агрессивно. Если этот самый Запад хотел спровоцировать конфликт для того, чтобы перейти к новому этапу борьбы с Россией, к новому этапу сдерживания нашей страны, то можно сказать, что это в известной степени удалось. И война развязана, и санкции введены. В нормальных условиях, наверное, трудно было бы это сделать. Но на что хотел бы обратить внимание? Они должны были бы понять, что уже проиграли с самого начала нашей специальной военной операции, потому что ее начало означает и начало кардинального слома миропорядка по-американски. Это начало перехода от либерально-глобалистского американского эгоцентризма к действительно многополярному миру. Запад, который некогда декларировал такие принципы демократии, как свобода слова, плюрализм, уважение иного мнения, сегодня вырождается в полную противоположность, в тоталитаризм, включая цензуру, закрытие средств массовой информации, произвол в отношении журналистов. Сегодня мы слышим, что нас хотят победить на поле боя. Ну, что здесь скажешь? Пусть попробуют. При этом мы не отказываемся и от мирных переговоров, но те, кто отказывается, должны знать, что чем дальше, тем сложнее им будет с нами договариваться.
And here is how he responded to a reporter's question at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization recently.
Добрый вечер. Слушаю вас.
Первый вопрос. Известия.
Да, пожалуйста.
Добрый вечер, телеканал России, Павел Зарубин. У меня вопрос, который волнует, конечно, очень многих в стране. У людей уже существует определенная обеспокоенность ходом специальной военной операции на Украине. Мы все чаще видим удары и вылазки даже по территории России, теракты на территории России. Постоянно слышим очень агрессивные заявления о том, что конечная цель Киева и Запада – это распад России. При этом российская реакция на все происходящее, как вот кажется многим, она весьма сдержанная. Почему?
Что касается нашей сдержанной реакции, ну, я бы не сказал, что такая уж она сдержанная. Хотя мы все-таки специальная военная операция – это не какое-то там очередное предупреждение. Это все-таки. Но киевские власти же объявили о том, что они начали и проводят активную контрнаступательную операцию. Ну, посмотрим, как она будет результат, чем она закончится. Пожалуйста.